I am going to go ahead and get started on introductions. This is just some background for the audience on our panelists today. This is obviously a women in criminal justice event, so all of our panelists are women. So first off, we have Laurie Meyer earned her Juris Doctor from the University of New Mexico in 2001 after completing her Bachelor of Arts in Criminology and her Masters of Public Administration. She was the managing editor of the UN Law Review from 2000 to 2001 and clerked for the United States Attorney's Office in the District of Albuquerque in the summer of 2000. Ms. Meyer has been a sole practitioner for the last 18 years, primarily in the area of criminal defense. In 2008, Ms. Meyer assisted the 13th Judicial District Court in New Mexico to help secure funding, to plan and implement the state's first mental health court in Sandoval County. She continued as the program director for the specialty court until 2019, when she and her husband relocated to the state of Mississippi. Welcome, Ms. Meyer.
Thank you.
And then we have Kelly Hume. Kelly earned her Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and Criminology from the University of South Florida in 2013, and she got her Master of Criminal Justice from the University of Colorado in 2018. She has worked in the criminal justice system in a variety of positions with exposure to the judicial system, criminal justice policy, offender treatment, and homeland security. She worked as a probation officer in Colorado's first judicial district, as a statistical analyst for the Colorado Division of Criminal Justice's Office of Domestic Violence and Sex Offender Management. That is a mouthful. And as an intelligence analyst for the Colorado Information Analysis Center. She currently works as a criminal intelligence analyst for the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office in Florida. Welcome, Kelly. We have Laurie, is it Halibut? Is that correct?
Halibut, it's close.
Okay, thank you. So Laurie Halibut, Captain Laurie Halibut earned her bachelor's degree from Metropolitan State University and a master's degree from Colorado State University. She's a graduate of the School of Police Staff in Command at Northwestern University and Denver University's Public Safety Leadership Program. She completed the Southern Police Institute Chief Executive Leadership Program, the International Association of Chiefs of Police Executive Women in Leadership Program, and the Police Executive Research Forum Senior Management Institute for Police. Captain Halibut started as a deputy with the Arapahoe County Sheriff's Office in 1999. She worked in detentions, patrol, as a school resource officer, and on a drug task force team before being promoted to sergeant in 2009.
Got me right now.
She then took a position in the Office of Professional Standards before being promoted to lieutenant in 2012. Captain Halibut broke the glass ceiling by becoming the first female in the agency to be promoted to the rank of captain in 2014. Welcome, Laurie. And then finally, we have Elizabeth Gorginsky. Is that correct? Awesome. Elizabeth earned her bachelor's degree from the University of Maryland and her master's degree in social sciences from the University of Colorado, Denver. She previously served as the Assistant Superintendent of Early Learning for the District of Columbia, which was the first in the nation to pursue universal pre-K. Elizabeth previously directed early childhood education for United Way Worldwide, where she helped to expand the number of communities collecting and using population-based early childhood data. She was also the first executive director of the Early Childhood Data Collaborative, which improves state policies and practices in the development and use of early childhood data. She has a large range of experience with Head Start programs and was named the first early childhood secretary in New Mexico, a title she currently resides with. So welcome, Elizabeth. Welcome to all of our panelists, actually. We are very, very glad to have you guys here. Very excited for this event. All right, and so we will go ahead and get started here. So first question I have for all of you ladies is, what factors shaped your decision to pursue a career in a field related to criminal justice, and how has gender impacted your career trajectory? Let's start with Elizabeth.
Thank you, Casey. It's wonderful to be here tonight. My undergraduate actually was in criminology from the University of Maryland, but I also had a women's studies certificate. So my focus in thinking about crime and communities and families was always deeply embedded with gender and how that impacts our crime in our communities. And my first job out of college was working in the domestic violence initiative inside the community corrections office in Boulder County, Colorado. And so I began to work and really understand the impact. At that time, domestic violence was becoming a new crime. It was being added as a offense onto criminal activity. And a lot of women were getting arrested alongside their partners. And so we were doing a lot of education and work with police, with women's shelters. And I had a great opportunity to just learn how the system, even though we have these policies that we put in place, sometimes when we're not thinking about the impact of gender and the way it plays its role in families and in communities, how an unintended consequence of a really good policy could have on women. And so we had to do a lot of education. And from there, I think it's just, I've always been thinking about how women are impacted by the criminal justice system. Oftentimes they are the co-defendant, or they're someone involved, but yet their lives take a very poor trajectory because of that impact and people not understanding the relationship of gender and crime. So that's how I got started. And then from there went into early childhood, more of a promotion prevention. I'm hoping to get kids early and support families with the services and supports that will keep them out of the criminal justice system.
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes total sense. Do you feel like gender impacted your trajectory? I don't know why I'm having such a hard time with that word today. Specifically?
It did, because I think those studies in undergraduate really understanding how both gender and race and other things intersect, and how your opportunities can sometimes be limited, not by your own ability, but by the systems and structures that have determined that, you know, women have these roles or not these roles. And in early childhood, it's a predominantly female industry. Some of the lowest paid people in any community are working in our early childhood programs. So I think it's always influenced me, and it's always made me a stronger advocate in thinking about how we dismantle the systems and inequalities for both gender and race as well.
All right. Do we want to go ahead and move on to Laurie? And if you need me to repeat the question, please feel free, and I will do it again.
No, I think I'm good. I'm kind of one of the odd ones that would say that I didn't grow up wanting to be a cop. I just kind of fell into it. When I was in high school, I got a part-time job at a local sheriff's office, and from when I was 16, and just started working in different fields of law enforcement. I worked in the court system for a while, and then, you know, nothing seemed to really fulfill me enough. So I thought, oh, why not? Let's try to be a deputy. And sure enough, the first agency I applied for was Arapahoe County, and here I am, like 22 years later. It's amazing how time flies when you're having fun. So it definitely has gone by really fast. I have learned a lot. I would like to think that I'm the one who has so far kind of given the path to a lot of females in our agency, just because I am the first female that has ever been promoted to the rank of captain. And I'm going to keep going. Let's see what happens. I do feel at times that it was a challenge for me to break that glass ceiling in a male-dominated profession.
Yeah.
And it seemed that were times that I would have to prove myself more than the guys did. But you know, I think slowly but surely things are changing, and the culture is changing, and it's in our agency we have almost 16% females, so which is really good. Yeah, so I'm very happy to see that. So, you know, I look back at how I started, and I never would have thought I would be doing what I am doing today, but I love it. So I'll keep going for as long as I can.
Yeah, absolutely. That is super fantastic. That's very, very, very cool, to be honest with you. So thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right, we will move on to Laurel.
Make sure I took myself off of mute. So I went to law school after getting my undergraduate degree in criminology. And initially, when I went to law school, I always thought that I wanted to be on the good side and work for the district attorney's office and prosecute crimes. And so, as you read earlier, I also clerked for the U.S. Attorney's Office, which prosecutes federal crimes. And actually, up until even the summer between my second and third year of law school, it was my assumption that I would go to work for a district attorney's office and prosecute crimes. But during the period of time that I was waiting for my bar results, I clerked for a small firm in the small town where I lived in New Mexico, which is south of Albuquerque. And they did a lot of criminal defense for private clients and through contracts with the New Mexico Public Defender's Office. And I think, that experience was really eye-opening for me. I saw that criminal defendants were so underserved that they really needed some help getting, themselves back on track for many of them. I mean, some of them just, they are habitual criminal offenders. But many of them are honestly misunderstood. And so the longer, I continued to work for this firm from, May, and then took the bar. And then, of course, New Mexico doesn't give you your results until late September. I worked for this firm, and I will tell you that changed me. I really felt like their work with, the underdog, so to speak, was really more appealing to me. And so at this point, my entire career as an attorney, which is close to 20 years now, has been always involved criminal defense. You asked about gender and whether or not it impacted or how it impacted my career trajectory. And in all honesty, I don't think that it did. At the time that I went to law school, at least, University of New Mexico was almost 50-50, male and female. And I honestly didn't see gender as a barrier or anything that motivated me or discouraged me from going into law school and then going into sort of the criminal justice related field.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. It's going to be definitely, I think, very interesting to see between everybody how gender played a role, if it did or did not. So it's going to be very cool to see. Thank you. Awesome. All right. And then we are on to Kelly, and then we will get on to our next question.
Well, thank you so much for having me. First of all, I'm super excited to be here. And regarding the question, I kind of always knew I wanted to work in criminal justice. Like what specifically sort of spurred that, I couldn't tell you. But if you had asked me when I was in high school what I'd be doing in the criminal justice field, I certainly would not have told you intelligence analysis or crime analysis. I would have told you, oh, I'm going to be working for the FBI as, a special agent doing all kinds of crazy stuff. But I think a lot of sort of what brought me where I am now are the different things that I saw, much like what others have spoken about with how things actually work, like, what we learn about in school compared to this is the reality of the situation. And this is a lot of times where there are shortcomings, or this is the information that we underutilize. And so as an intelligence analyst and as a crime analyst and the different positions where I've worked, being able to provide those those factual pieces, I think has been amazing, because when you talk about things like gender in the workplace or race in the workplace, sexual orientation, any of those different things, it becomes a very emotional topic for many people. And so for me as an analyst, being able to bring in the statistics and bring in the facts and bring in the complete objective perspective on these different issues, I absolutely love it. And some former coworkers always joked that I was Data from Star Trek because I brought statistics to everything. And that, I think, now is what drives me, is being able to bring that fact, take the emotion out of it. Let's look at what is. You know, I respect your opinion, but data says you're wrong. So that's kind of where I come from with a lot of that. But as far as how gender impact my career trajectory, I don't think it did mine personally. I was fortunate enough that by the time, you know, I was an undergrad, most of my classmates were women, most of my instructors were women, and most of my coworkers have been women. And I have to say, I've been so incredibly fortunate to be surrounded by very inspirational and very strong women who empowered me as a young female coming into the criminal justice field, saying, you know, they had to put up with a bunch of unpleasantries. And so when I came in, they'd be like, hey, if somebody does this or says this, it's not okay. We've got your back and you have like full power to say something. And so sometimes I might take that a step just too far. I'm very straightforward in my opinions with things, but having that support when I was young and having that awareness that it could be a possibility, I think has let me make an impact for, you know, women who join the field after I do, that they might not have to deal with it as much because, you know, my generation has been able to actively stop or intervene or, you know, be that change, hopefully.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Kelly. That makes perfect sense. Like I said, definitely going to be interesting. I think we've certainly moved towards a place, I would like to think, where we're a little more open to women in this field. I definitely think those some areas, obviously, just kind of depends on the area in terms of how people or how far people have gotten. So this is definitely going to be super interesting. So thank you all for that first question. Next question I have for you guys. So what do you believe women add to the criminal justice system generally and to your career field specifically? And we'll start with Elizabeth again.
Thank you. I think definitely, as these wonderful women here have showed, an amazing perspective. You know, I think women from different walks of life, though, they often have the role mostly in caregiving, whether it's for children or for older people. So I think just that perspective of what it means to develop young human beings. And so we know that so much of what happens in our criminal justice system starts so early and that it's intergenerational. So I think just having women in these positions and having them in more of the fields and at the higher level, congratulations, Laurie, that's fantastic. We hope to see you go all the way, is so important. And as I said earlier, in early childhood, we need to actually attract more men to our field because we are predominantly women. But I think that, you know, what we've seen there is that, again, this is a field that are paid very low wages to do the most incredible and important work for our future and to develop our young people from infancy all the way until they're, you know, in middle school and beyond. So I would just say that women in the criminal justice system are essential. I remember when I first worked in the courts, I mean, some of the women judges were just, I mean, they were some of the toughest. They were, like, you couldn't tell, but they're also, it was ferocious and, you know, wanting to get in there and really get the facts, get the data, but also, you know, defend the rights of people. So I think that's a passion and, you know, not to be gender stereotypical, but I think just in the sense that they have had that role in society and they bring a really important perspective to such an important topic as criminal justice and criminal justice reform, even more importantly.
Absolutely, thank you. All right, Laurie.
All right, well, I'm gonna have to kind of jump on the bandwagon there. I have noticed in my field of work over the years, since I've been doing this, that females, we have this presence about us that when we go to a volatile situation, that just having a female presence has a tendency to sometimes calm down the situation. And there's been some recent studies done that with agencies, when a female gets involved in a tense situation, the use of force has a tendency to go down because we have a tendency to be calmer, and our de-escalation skills are better, and we're more patient. So and I've seen that, and I do believe it, but I also have to say that I can be very nice and very patient when I need to be. But then again, if things go awry and I need to use my mom's voice, it will happen. So it's not very often, but it does. But I do think that having a female in our type of work definitely does help in a lot of ways, just bring the calmness to a lot of the testosterone we have going.
Absolutely, I would totally agree with that as well. I'm also jumping on the bandwagon. Awesome. All right, Laurel.
Obviously, having women in just lawyers as well as involved in the criminal justice system is just, it's more balanced for our clients. It's more balanced for everyone involved. You know, for a lot of people see, again, you know, I'm criminal defense attorney, so I'm always you know, supportive of the underdog, but you know, many criminal defendants are themselves victims, in particular women. And so their story actually is relevant to the case. You have to be able to speak openly and honestly with your attorney. And if someone feels like they can't do that because they can't disclose abuse by a partner or abuse by a parent, or you know, whether it's sexual or physical abuse, you know, that can impact a case. And so I think the last thing that a woman in that position wants to do is tell their male lawyer, you know, the details of that type of abuse. And so I think that, you know, that's the one thing that comes to mind that's major. I think that probably my female clients have been the most appreciative, and honestly the most forthcoming with me when it comes to you know, letting me know really what's going on so that I can try to present that to the court in a way that will help them.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Awesome, thank you. And we are down to Kelly.
So I think, as everyone has stated, just having that different perspective, especially if it's in a very specifically male-dominated part of the justice system. And I mean, that would be true for, you know, having different opinions from anybody, but I do think that a lot of times when working with victims, especially as Laurel mentioned, domestic violence and sex crimes and things like that, as a female, I found when talking to male coworkers, like when they talk about, you know, different situations of, say, maybe sexual harassment or something along those lines. And, you know, they might not have daughters, or they might have very young daughters who haven't necessarily been exposed to that sort of thing. And talking about the different things that victims experience, or women who come forward experience. And a lot of times the guys that I work with, or have worked with, might have this perspective of just like, well, it doesn't happen that often, or, you know, it's not something that would happen in our agency, or, you know, in our department, or whatever it might be. And I, in a very uncomfortable way, find myself quite lucky to be like, well, not actually true. Let's talk about the reality of this. And I think just some of those, you know, microaggressions that women experience just throughout their day, like on a daily basis, being able to articulate those to male coworkers with whom I do have very good relationships and who respect me and my opinion and my view on things, I think for them is very helpful. Then when they go out and interact with female victims, or you know, other female coworkers, when they can now think like, oh, hey, this is a thing. You know, I knew theoretically it existed, but now I see that this happens to more than just, you know, very extreme cases. So I think that, for me at least, is something that I do feel I've been able to bring from a female perspective into my world.
Awesome, thank you, Kelly. All right, next question. And these are getting a little bit longer. So again, if anyone needs me to repeat these, again, just feel free and I will definitely do it. Work-life balance has been identified as a barrier to female employment and advancement in the workplace. How have you managed this struggle, if you've had it? And what other gender-specific challenges have you faced in your education and/or job? We'll go back to Elizabeth.
Okay, thanks. That's a great question, Casey. I think for me, I chose not to have children, so that took out one of the work-life balances that many women have to face. So I see it a lot around me, though, and we see it a lot through the pandemic. We're seeing a lot of women having to leave the workplace to take care of their children. For me personally, I think women generally, we work more, we take on more, oftentimes in the workplace, and we don't ask up front as clearly. Like, I've watched my male colleagues, go in and negotiate what they want, when they want it. And I think sometimes that doesn't come as naturally. We're not raised to be that. So those are some of the things I've seen that I probably could have gotten faster in some things if I had some of that sense of, we always have this over sense of confidence. Like, where does that come from? Like, they just ask for things and we're like, no way, you couldn't possibly, but then they get it. And so kind of learning that. And then I think just, being in the workplace, the more, I'm assistant superintendent, now I'm a cabinet secretary, but you still see this where men will sometimes be the first ones to talk. They'll be, talking, you kind of have to push yourself into the conversation. So, and assert your point of view. I still feel myself sometimes like, should I talk or should I speak up? Because again, they come at the meeting and the conversation with such confidence. So I think that's what I would encourage women to always speak up. And I think, as Kelly said, you've had these great mentors. I've had some great mentors. We really do need to, because sometimes what you're going to say is going to change the whole nature of that conversation. And I've been able to do that in this new role as the cabinet secretary. I sometimes have to self-talk, saying, okay, you have to speak up because you know things. And then when I do, it does change the conversation. And so I think it's important for us to recognize that our lived experiences and our work experience really need to come to bear, and we need to bring it forward in those meetings, in those places, in communities, but also in those big meetings where there are a lot of men. Sometimes the secretaries were like, it seems like the male secretaries can just speak up so much more confidently and competently. So encourage all of you to do that. Have good mentors in your life, good coaches who keep pushing you is my good advice.
Awesome. Thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah, I definitely agree. I would say my personal life, I definitely experience very similar things too. I think that's kind of a hard lesson, and it takes time for sure to get over, but it's also, I feel like, super exciting when you do get over that hump and for the first time feel like you actually made a difference in a conversation or spoke up first. It's really great. So absolutely. Thank you. All right, Laurie.
Okay, well, I'm going to add my 2 cents onto that as well, because I have definitely seen that. I know from probably the first year or two when I got promoted to a command level, and only female in the room, and same thing, the guys were just overbearing. And, I would sit there and I listened a lot. I just listened, took everything in. And then it got to a point where I was comfortable enough to say, wait a second, let's look at this a different way. And it does, it takes a little time. It can be very intimidating being in a room with a whole bunch of guys. But I do think that, in time, when you start building up your confidence, that everything will be going well. And it's just going to take some time, but definitely, you can definitely change the entire conversation and different views. And it's amazing how it can just flip, really. Okay, that's my 2 cents on that. So as far as work-life balance, I do have 2 children, and it was tough doing the work-life balance. My daughter basically has both my kids, this is the only job they've known me to do. And for them, it just became a norm, I guess, fortunately or unfortunately, that there would be Christmases I wouldn't be there, birthdays I wouldn't be there. I'd miss soccer games. And to them, it was like, oh yeah, mom's working, no big deal. But to me, it would constantly just break my heart that I couldn't be there. And it was tough. It was really tough. And, I'm lucky that I have two very understanding kids, and one has followed my career path. So I don't know. Yeah, my daughter did. So another female in this line of work. But it's tough being a mom and doing the shift work and missing holidays and missing birthdays. And there are times that I wish I wouldn't have, but both my kids are very proud of what I've done. So that's all that means to me. It's worth it.
Awesome. Thank you, Laurie. All right, Laurel.
So, like Elizabeth, I don't have children, so my work-life balance has not been about caring for children. But I mean, obviously, I have other interests. I'm a wife, I'm a friend, I'm a daughter, I'm an athlete. I have interests, of my own, and so I think that the very first thing that I did in order to avoid having to, and I'm not saying that I've never had to walk that line and make decisions, but I avoided big firms. I had a lot of my female, friends who, we all went to law school. They immediately came out and they were seeking the big law firm positions that require those 2,000 hours and the minimum billable hours. And I knew that was never something that I wanted to compete with, because it was always going to be my best friend sitting in her office on New Year's Eve trying to make those last, squeak in those last few hours so that she would get a bonus, or so that she didn't get in trouble, and so that was something I learned early on that I was not interested in. And I've worked primarily as a sole practitioner. So my first, actually less than 2 years, I worked for other attorneys, and the first firm ended up being the firm that I clerked for, and that I decided I wanted to do criminal defense for. It was 2 men. They were great. They were supportive. Then I worked for a female attorney for about 8 or 9 months. And, she showed me how not to practice law. But since then I have, I've been on my own. And so I've been able to some extent, you still have to work around court schedules and those kinds of things. But, I think boundaries, you have to establish boundaries. I'm not going to respond to your email on the weekend. When I say I'm on vacation, I'm on vacation. And, so don't call me after hours in the evening. And those are things that I think, I guess for women that might seem hard to do, especially when you're new in the field and you're trying to get out there and, it's easy for her to say, just establish boundaries. But honestly, I think I was strategic in some of the choices I made early on, in terms of not going to the big firms and, finding a firm that really fit me or leaving. And so that's, I think, how I've managed, so to speak, the work-life balance.
Awesome. Thank you, Laurel. All right, and Kelly.
I think that the topic that Laurel just brought up, as far as establishing those boundaries and how that can look different for women, is huge. I also don't have kids, so from that perspective, the work-life balance thing hasn't been so much of an issue, but I've definitely been in that position before where, as a female, especially younger, I felt like I had to do more to prove my credibility. And I would find myself, disrupting my own boundaries of, oh, well, it's fine. I can stay late. I can take care of that. Not a problem, because I wanted to show that I was capable of doing it or competent enough to take care of the issue, whatever it might have been. And so, kind of as was mentioned, where I found it more difficult, I think, than say my male counterparts to say, no, this is my weekend. I'm not doing this. I've put in my 8 hours. Unless you're paying me overtime, I'm going home. And I mean, certainly that depends on, the different, what project you're working on, or obviously if there's like a kidnapping case, I'm not just going to peace out and be like, sorry, I've worked my 40 hours. But at the same time, I do think that gender piece comes in pretty frequently, and being able to say, just no, this is my me time, this is my work time. You're going to have to come back when I'm working. So I actually hadn't thought of that when I was kind of preparing for this. So thank you for bringing that up. I think that's such an amazing point, and so important too for people to keep in mind, especially younger women, again, coming into this field.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, I feel like I'm sure everybody probably, both genders, deal with, trying to navigate what that looks like in terms of work-life balance. But I think that women specifically, especially when it comes to things like childbearing, we talk about how that's typically, previously been seen as a more of a responsibility for women. As women are moving into the workforce, what does that look like, and establish to get those in place. So all right, I think we are going to move on to the fourth question, and then we will go from there to see if we can get the last one. But Catalyst, a nonprofit organization that promotes inclusive workplaces for women, defines unconscious bias as an implicit association or attitude about race or gender that operates out of our control, informs our perception about a person or group, and can influence our decision making and behavior toward a person or group of people. What forms has this taken, or could you see it taking, in your field of employment? How can employers in the criminal justice field and related fields address unconscious bias? We'll go.
That's a big question, but we'll each give it a shot. I think you've got a good panel here. I think it's everywhere. Unconscious bias. I mean, we all grew up in our own realities, our own places. They may have been very integrated, diverse places. They may have been very segregated. And so I think when we come into a workplace, being intentional about making sure that we're supporting our employees in exploring, what their own biases are, but also understanding other people's histories. And something we're doing in our department right now is it's like an equity council, and just really discovering and talking to each other about our own journeys in life, and where we've learned different things and where we've gained different knowledge and perspective along our career trajectory. So I think in the criminal justice system, whether it's in behavioral health, in the police, in the courts, in the prisons, this is just essential because so many people have such diverse lived experiences that if we don't explore that and understand, where we're coming from, then I think that it's going to be very challenging for us to do the kind of reform and transformation that I think we all want in our criminal justice system, to be where we can be supporting families and young children in their communities with the supports they need. But if we don't think people deserve that, or that there's other things impeding that, it's going to continue to show up, and we're going to see the kind of incredible, racial disparities and social injustices that we have across our country in all aspects. So I would offer that and just say we really need to invest in this process and allowing people to talk about their experiences and validate and value everybody's perspective.
Absolutely. Thank you, Elizabeth. All right, Laurie.
Well, again, I'm going to kind of piggyback on Elizabeth's comments there. I completely agree with her view and her line of thinking that we definitely need to learn where that person is coming from. And as we all know, this is a really a hot topic right now in law enforcement. So we are putting out a lot more education for our line level deputies and civilians and dispatchers to really just step back and take the person as a whole, and to truly try to understand where they're coming from, and not to jump to quick conclusions or whatever your unconditional bias could be. You may not even know what your bias is until you start looking at yourself and things that the way you think and the way that you process situations. You may not even recognize it. So we do, as you know, I know we get a lot of this from my own staff, like this huggy feely type thing, but it's, you know, you have to know yourself before you can do anything else. And so, you know, we've had a lot of introspection and, you know, and then again, you know, when you have a bunch of guys, they're just like, oh, well, what are we going to do next? Meditate? So, you know, yeah, right. So, you know, but it's true. And after they actually take the time to do it, it's pretty amazing. They get that aha moment like, oh, yeah, I get it. So, you know, it takes time and patience, but I truly believe just by the time that and all the things that I've dealt with in my career that just learning more about yourself and the person that you're dealing with is definitely going to bridge that gap in between and make things more productive.
Awesome. Thank you, Laurie. All right, Laurel.
So in terms of what forms unconscious bias has taken in my my field of employment, I guess, you know, it's kind of like I'm an attorney, so I've got that kind of going on. And then, so you've got, you know, male attorneys and judges and so on. And then, you know, just my involvement in the criminal justice system. I think overall, I would have to say that, you know, I don't know if I just didn't recognize it or I'm just, you know, too resilient. I don't know what it is, but I can tell you that over the last 20 years, I can honestly think of only maybe 2 or 3 times where I actually sort of experienced, you know, that kind of unconscious bias. And, you know, I mean, for example, you have men, you know, whether they're attorneys or judges. I had one hearing officer who literally interrupted me in the middle of presenting one of my witnesses because he just assumed that I wasn't going to be able to get around a hearsay issue. And so, you know, and it's funny because I was actually opposing counsel was a friend of mine. And he was just horrified, you know, at the end. I mean, I literally in the middle of this hearing, you know, was kind of leading my witness down a path. And suddenly this hearing officer jumps in and starts taking over. And I had to just stand back for a second and interrupt him and say, I'm sorry, you know, I'd like to have my witness back. You know, I've got this. But, you know, my male opposing counsel, you know, was just horrified at the end. And, you know, so I think that's an example of sort of mansplaining that happens. You know, men, attorneys or judges, sometimes, you know, they just assume that you don't know, or, you know, and they feel like they have to do that, you know, and again, it doesn't happen that often, but, you know, that's one very clear example that stands out to me, where it was kind of like, no, I mean, I've got this. And then, you know, I did have one judge, and he was kind of quirky anyway, but there was a judge down south in Socorro, New Mexico, who had been there forever and had this expectation that female attorneys show up in a dress or a skirt. And so I had been told that, you know, plenty of times before I even appeared before this judge. And so I made sure I wore a pantsuit every single time. And, you know, but it's just kind of that. It's just sort of, I think it's an age related thing as well. You got a lot of old men on the bench, and you've got a lot of older men who are attorneys, and, you know, it's just not something that they're used to. You know, back, it wasn't that long ago where women weren't practicing. And so, you know, it's not that that's an excuse, but I think especially in poor Judge Case's case, it was a matter of just being an old traditional man. And then I think just the last thing, just to, you know, as a female attorney, you know, when you're being a zealous advocate, or you're being, you know, you're putting your foot down, you know, we can think of the kinds of names that women get called when they are being assertive or zealous. And, you know, I think sometimes, you know, people, men in particular, will walk away saying, well, she's abrasive, or, you know, she's a bitch, or, you know, whatever it is. And so that's something that, you know, I think is there. But again, I think that's more in the legal profession and not necessarily limited to the criminal justice system.
Absolutely, yeah. Again, in my own personal experiences, obviously I'm nowhere near as experienced as you guys by far, but I definitely have experienced similar things as well. So, all right, Kelly.
So just to piggyback off of that really quickly, I think my favorite was I had a male supervisor tell me that I was very masculine in my communication style because of how direct and assertive I am when presenting information. I'm like, all right, it's fine. This is totally fine. We'll talk about this later. I'm just going to go ahead and leave your office now before I say some very masculine things. But aside from that, I can't think of too many instances where I've experienced more of that overt sexism or misogyny, or any of those kinds of things. I think for me, majority of what I've experienced have really been, for lack of a better term, coming from a place of concern. When I started out as a probation officer, obviously, some of my male colleagues and male supervisors were concerned that I was going to be, chewed up and spit out, because I am not very physically imposing, and I definitely sound young, I look young, and even though I do have experience and I'm very confident in what I do, and I know I can do things successfully, it does present that appearance of, oh God, she's going to break like a porcelain doll. And that's something, even now, almost 5-10 years later, like throughout my career, I've experienced that every time I've started somewhere new. And now I sit in a room with 15 male detectives who, like, I literally have projectiles flying past me at all points in time because it's basically like working with 14-year-olds. And I love it. Like, I love all of them. They're amazing. I couldn't be happier with where I work. But it's, again, when I first started, the hiring panel was concerned about my not having a thick enough skin based on my age, my appearance, my gender. And as any of my former coworkers, I know there are a couple here actually attending this, they will be more than happy to tell you that that is not something anyone ever has to be concerned about with me. But again, I do think there have been some instances where I've had to kind of work a little bit harder and sort of retake control of the situation because, mansplaining is a thing. If I'm standing there presenting as the subject matter expert at a particular situation or on a particular topic, and somebody in the audience starts trying to explain it to me, and it's like, all right, okay, I'm going to go ahead and correct you now. So here's all the reasons why you're wrong. And so I'm sure you guys can tell as I'm talking, like, I use facts to kind of support myself, and I have absolutely no problem correcting people. And I think in that regard, I've been very fortunate that it has broken down a lot of those potential gender barriers because my personality kind of barrels through any of those walls. And I think that takes a lot of people, I think works in my favor. But like I mentioned earlier, as far as addressing those unconscious biases, just bringing them to light, pointing them out when you see them. And it doesn't have to be in a disrespectful or condescending or rude way. But, if one of the guys at the office says something like, oh, well, girls just aren't as strong as guys are, I'll just pull up a YouTube video of a female completely blowing a guy out of the water in some athletic feat and just email it to them. Don't have to say anything, don't have to, make a big deal out of it. But again, they've just been, that what you just said is completely not factual and stupid, basically.
I can just start us off. So the question is, what policies or practices can be put in place to minimize the gender gap in employment and in criminal justice and related fields? I would definitely say things like paid family leave, making sure there's flexible work policies. I mean, that's going to be critical to make sure that women have those environments. And of course, equal pay for equal credentials and equal work. I think that's always important. But I think those flexible family policies and paid family leave, that's one policy I would point out as essential.
I'll just follow up with that again with Elizabeth, that We are very lucky. I think we have been very progressive when it comes to taking care of our females in our agency, especially our new moms. We've set up lactation rooms for our moms. So even if they're working the street, they can come into our headquarters and do what they need to do. It, you know, progressively is getting better. Our leave is great. I mean, I have no complaints. And, you know, as far as taking some family time if needed, you know, all of our supervisors are great to allow people to do that. I think when it comes to hiring, there's a huge gender gap, especially in our line of work. So I don't know if we've tried to tackle different ways of trying to hire more females, but it's tough. It's a tough, any job in criminal justice is tough for females. We try to educate more. We do a lot of academies just for females, just so they can see what we do to maybe get them in that way. We take probation officers, we kind of get them from everywhere, but like I said, that's going to take time as well. But I'm very happy with, our as far as our benefits for families right now. So no complaints there.
Awesome. Thank you, Laurie. Thank you guys for jumping on that. I'm not really sure what just happened, but we'll definitely just keep going. Laurel?
Sure. I would agree with everything that Elizabeth and Laurie have said. I think, flexibility is big. I think if, 2020 showed us that we can be just as productive working remote. I think that would help in attracting women and retaining women in the criminal justice field. And before I lose, because I know we're getting close to the end of time, and so I don't know what kinds of questions we'll have, but I wanted to say, I mean, despite the title of this presentation and some of the things that we've highlighted as sort of gender bias issues in our profession, I wouldn't be discouraged, to take a position in the criminal justice field, whether it's a probation officer, an attorney, whatever that looks like. I think it's a very rewarding field, quite frankly. It has been for me.
Awesome. Thank you, Laurel. All right, Kelly.
I think the two major policy changes have been addressed, and I completely agree with Laurel. Again, clearly we have a lot of same experiences. Just being able to work in this field is amazing, and being able, knowing that I am making a change in how women in the field are viewed, and even just with the individuals with whom I work, it's awesome. I wouldn't trade it for anything, even with people occasionally thinking that I'm a little bit masculine in my communication styles. I will take that any day if it makes a difference for somebody else.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right. So that was our last question for the panel, obviously. I'm glad we actually got to get through all of those. Right now we have 2 questions, so we'll get through those and then kind of go from there. First question was, can the panelists give an example of when their gender impacted the outcome of a situation? I was saying we'll start with Elizabeth whenever you are ready.
I say maybe we could start with Laurie or Laurel. They might have more.
I can do it, Elizabeth, if you want me to.
I was going to say you probably have a few. Go ahead, Laurie or Laurel, because I got to think about it for a little bit longer.
Okay, then I'll jump in.
Thank you.
So we've kind of talked about it before. I mean, I could mention a few situations of when I worked out on the street as a line deputy, but most recent, being a female in a command level position where there's more males. It's again, we talked about it, the mansplaining and how, they're so linear in thinking that sometimes they have a hard time getting the emotional side out of them. And so when we have to talk about situations, how it would affect our personnel as far as making any type of policy changes or stuff, obviously the first thing that comes to my mind is, oh, how's that going to affect their family life? So I do think that having a female's perspective and throwing in the touchy-feely type, I think it does help a lot as far as making a very equal decision when it comes to certain things. So that's how I think I've impacted most recently.
Thank you, Laurie. Laurel, Kelly, anyone who is good to go, and you guys are more than welcome if you don't necessarily have an answer, that's okay too. But feel free to jump in, whoever wants to respond.
So I'll just, it's not specific to any case or person, but part of the work that I did, and I think you mentioned it in my introduction, was in New Mexico. It involved the mental health court. So after we kind of created that court, I became the director. I was actually wearing a lot of hats. I was kind of the surveillance officer, director, reporter to the judge, and it was kind of I wore many hats in that position, none of which were, attorney. And, those clients were very high needs, the people that were, given access to the mental health court. We had very little funding. And so we had very specific criteria that people had to meet. And I think that, for the men and the women, having me, and I liken it to maybe having a female probation officer. I'm not sure, but, I think it was less intimidating having me sort of be the person that was supervising them, so to speak. And I think they were more inclined to tell me things and be more truthful with me than they were with, say, of course, the judge, who was a male, or, another surveillance officer who was a male. And so I think that actually served me well in that position. I know that the person who came in after I left about 2 years ago, he reaches out to me all the time, and, he struggles all the time. And unfortunately, he's had some repeat. We've had some people come back in to the program that I'm very familiar with. And, he just can't seem to connect or get anywhere with these individuals. But I think that my gender most definitely played a role in being successful in that role.
Awesome, thank you, Laurel. Kelly or Elizabeth, did either of you? Oh, Kelly.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry, didn't mean to cut you off. No, working in probation, actually, it's interesting because I sort of had the same experience, but with men, like younger guys who were on my caseload, where a lot of them, of course, would come in, chest puffed up and being Mr. Tough Guy, and then they'd see me and be like, oh, you're not scary. And so I think it gave them the opportunity to not have to be hard, basically, for lack of a better term. And we established pretty quickly that, they were in fact going to do what I required them to do. But I think it was, for a lot of them, the first time where they weren't met with somebody who looked adversarial and who they didn't inherently perceive as being a threat. And so I had the record for the most thank yous while people were being arrested in my office. And I think it's because we were able to establish that relationship of, I'm not here to screw your life up, but please understand that there are standards to which I am going to hold you. And then they, on the other hand, had an opportunity to be vulnerable without having their masculinity challenged because I was a female. And so in that regard, I think that's something where that probably wouldn't have been the same had I been male. So that's kind of the best example I could think of, but I am glad that I was able to have the opportunity to work with those individuals and give them the chance to express weakness and be soft and, be kind to themselves.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thank you, Kelly. Elizabeth, did you want to touch on this last question? No? Okay. Awesome. We are going to go ahead and actually wrap it up because we are a little bit over on time. I do want to say thank you to all of our panelists for being here on behalf of the school and everybody else involved. Super great to have you guys here. Your experiences are definitely something I think that resonate with a lot of different women in the workplace. I think having strong examples of women like you in this field are really going to push a lot of people to take those next steps and push those boundaries. So thank you for being you and keep doing what you're doing. But thank you for being here.